April 1979. Tanzanian artillery pounds the outskirts of Kampala. Inside the State Research Bureau headquarters at Nakasero, the men who ran Uganda's torture chambers for 8 years face a choice: burn the files, flee into the bush, or wait for the exile forces closing in. Some of Idi Amin's inner circle had orchestrated the disappearance of Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanuka without trial. Others supervised the beating and mutilation of detainees at Nile Mansion. Now, as the regime collapses in 72 hours, their own brutal last moments begin. Between 100,000 and 300,000 Ugandans had already vanished. No proceedings, no verdicts. How did a regime eliminate its own leadership without anyone stopping it? To understand the men dying inside Nakasero, rewind to 25 January 1971. President Milton Obote was attending a Commonwealth summit in Singapore when his army commander Idi Amin sent tanks into the streets of Kampala and seized the country. Within months, Amin had constructed 2 parallel killing machines. The first was the State Research Bureau, a euphemistically named intelligence service headquartered at Nakasero, a stone's throw from the presidential residence. The second was the military police, operating out of Nile Mansion, a converted hotel in a central Kampala whose basements were retrofitted into interrogation rooms. Detainees were brought in by Peugeot 504s with tinted windows. Survivors described concrete floors slick with blood, sledgehammers stacked in corners, and the sound of generators masking the screaming. The International Commission of Jurists later estimated 300,000 dead, but the real bloodshed didn't target strangers. It consumed those closest to power. Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanuka had been Uganda's first prime minister before independence. In September 1972, soldiers in plain clothes walked into the High Court in Kampala, dragged him from his chambers in his judicial robes, and drove him to Makindi Barracks. He was never seen alive again. Witnesses later reported that Kiwanuka was beaten with rifle butts in the courtroom itself before being forced into a waiting vehicle. His family received no notification, no body, no explanation. Charles Oboth Ofumbi, Amin's own Minister of Internal Affairs, disappeared in February 1977 alongside Anglican Archbishop Janani Luwum after a staged car accident on the road to Entebbe. Unlike Nazi officials tried at Nuremberg, unlike Soviet purge victims who at least received the theater of show trials, Amin's regime dispensed with proceedings entirely. There was no paperwork, no charge sheet, no execution order. There was only the Peugeot, the basement, and the silence afterward. By March 1974, Amin's paranoia had metastasized to the point that he publicly reshuffled his high command, purging officers who had helped him stage the 1971 coup. Brigadier Charles Arub, his own army chief of staff, was killed in a confrontation at the State House compound. The pattern was clear. Proximity to Amin was not protection, but a death sentence. The men who built the torture chambers were increasingly likely to end up inside them. And as the 1970s wore on, the killing accelerated toward a final catastrophic decision. From 1977 onward, the purges inside the Ugandan army turned industrial. Suspected rivals were dragged from barracks at Mbarara, Jinja, and Masaka, executed in groups, and buried in unmarked pits. Entire ethnic units, particularly Acholi and Langi soldiers associated with the old Obote regime, were systematically eliminated. Amin's surviving inner circle now consisted largely of Kakwa and Nubian loyalists from his home region, men who understood that defection meant death and that loyalty no longer guaranteed survival either. In October 1978, Amin made the decision that ended everything. He ordered an invasion of the Kagera salient in northern Tanzania, annexing roughly 720 square miles of Tanzanian territory. His troops looted villages, burned homes, and killed civilians along the border. President Julius Nyerere responded with overwhelming force. 20,000 Tanzanian regulars, joined by Ugandan exile units under Yoweri Museveni and Tito Okello, advanced north through 1979. The Libyan troops Muammar Gaddafi sent to save Amin were slaughtered at Lukaya in March. By 10 April 1979, Tanzanian forces entered Kampala. The State Research Bureau headquarters at Nakasero was overrun and looted. Files burned in the courtyard. Some inner circle members, including Vice President Mustafa Idrisi, had already fled. Others, like intelligence chief Farouk Minawa, slipped across borders into Zaire and Sudan. A few were captured by mobs in the streets and beaten to death before any tribunal could intervene. But this story separates itself from every other dictator you've heard of. Amin himself never spent a single day in custody. As Kampala fell, he flew first to Tripoli, where Gaddafi sheltered him for roughly a year. Friction with his hosts pushed him to Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and finally, in the early 1980s, to Jeddah on the Red Sea coast of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royal family provided him with 2 villas, a monthly stipend, reportedly in the tens of thousands of dollars, drivers, cooks, and a guarantee against extradition. He raised his children. He drove around Jeddah in a white Cadillac. He attended prayers at local mosques, lived quietly among expatriates, and gave occasional interviews insisting he had been a good leader, misunderstood by his enemies. Compare this with the alternatives. Nazi leadership faced Nuremberg in 1945 and 1946. Chilean General Manuel Contreras eventually went to prison. Argentine junta leaders Jorge Videla and Emilio Massera died in custody after convictions. Even Saddam Hussein, Amin's former host, was hanged in 2006. Amin lived in Saudi protection for roughly 24 years. On 16 August 2003, at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Jeddah, reportedly aged 78, he was removed from life support after multiple organ failure. He was buried with full Muslim funeral rites in Ruwais Cemetery the same day. No Ugandan victim's family was present. No court ever heard testimony against him. The architect of an estimated 300,000 deaths died in an air-conditioned hospital room with his family at his bedside. And the implications of this impunity still echo today. Look closer at the academic and legal aftermath of this collapse. In the 1980s, researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Ausländisches und Internationales Strafrecht in Freiburg used Uganda under Amin as a case study of Staatsterrorismus. Their conclusion was unsettling. Classical criminal law, built around individual guilt and discrete criminal acts, could not adequately prosecute mass killing organized by the state itself. The concepts of complicity and command responsibility had to be rethought from the ground up. Meanwhile, Stern magazine's feature, titled Idi Amin, Die Geschichte des Bösen, documented something equally uncomfortable. European arms dealers, including West German firms, had supplied Amin's security forces with vehicles, radios, and small arms throughout the early 1970s, even as the disappearances mounted. The comforting story that Europe merely watched from a distance does not survive contact with the export records. And in Jeddah, surviving family members continued to insist Amin was a misunderstood nationalist, betrayed by economic sabotage and foreign conspiracies. This pattern of impunity didn't end in 2003. Returning to the question that opened this story, how does a regime eliminate its own leadership without anyone stopping it? Uganda's answer is the absence of an answer. There was no Nuremberg in Kampala. There were scattered prosecutions, exile deals, and memories preserved through oral histories, church liturgies, and survivor testimony rather than marble memorials. The torture chambers at Nakasero became office space. The mass graves remain largely unexcavated. Amin's villa in Jeddah still stands. Somewhere between the air-conditioned hospital room and the unmarked pits lies the uncomfortable truth about how justice actually works in the 20th century. The next regime made the same calculation, and the architects, once again, walked away.